So tell us about the spoon that you've been carving over the last day or so.
Well, David, James, Duncan, and I were walking down by Lookout Creek the first time and came across that beautiful 500-year-old Doug fir that came down in the flood, and chunks of Doug fir had burst from the base of it, and from one of those pieces of decaying wood, I carved this spoon. And I make spoons not because I can improve on that Doug fir. I mean, no one can improve on that Doug fir. I make spoons to honor the Doug fir, and I make spoons to remind myself that that humans can do good. That my relationship with that Doug fir doesn't have to be a negative thing, doesn't have to be a bad thing. In fact, I can make something that's beautiful and useful and simple that honors that tree. So it's a constant metaphor for me of the way I would like my entire relationship with the land to be. And I think, like story, we need things, we need symbols, and we need real things that pull us toward the way we would like the world to be. So this is not a plastic spoon, and when I make a spoon, it's that moment that I can be not participating in a throwaway society. So this is me and Doug fir together.
Great. So that's your individual relationship
Yeah,
with the land.
right.
Can you tell us a bit about how you think communities and their relationship with the land have to evolve?
Well, it's in my experience of living in a lot of different places, from rural Nepal to central Harlem to now rural Vermont, has been consistently the same. That even though those geographies are really different, people, like every other species, need a natural habitat. We need to feel that affinity and that connection to place. And when I was in central Harlem, that was all about urban gardening. But it was no less powerful than the people I've lived with in very, very remote Nepal. I mean, they would express their affinity and relationships in very, very similar terms. We need today, even in 2006, that relationship to the land. I think it's still the thing that most defines who we are, that relationship between soul and soil. And we like to think in our modern society that doesn't matter, that technology or our religions or our great intellect makes it possible for us to not have that. But I think all the pathologies that we see today, from the fact that a quarter of Americans, 1 in 4, now suffer some clinical depression, has its roots in the fact that we don't have as strong relationships. So my efforts in life now are to help the conservation movement understand how the role that people and community play in land, and how their work can be significantly strengthened with that focus, but also to help communities reconnect with the land, reconnect with their history and their story of their place.
So as conservationists and restorationists, how can we engage communities?
I think we engage communities first and foremost by taking the time to really listen to their stories. Still today, people love the land. I mean, sometimes our love for it is inadequately expressed, and sometimes we don't necessarily behave the right way. But the hope that I have, and the belief, the faith that I have, is that every human being still has some of that affinity, and allowing people to tell the stories about the places that they love is one of the most powerful ways to bring people and community back into the conservation story. And the other is just the language we use. Our work may be about endangered species. It may be about sustainability. But for most people, we have to use words that are more about health and fairness and relationship. These are the ideas that I think most Americans still really value. It's when conservation translate that into terms like endangered species, and that we lose our ability to really communicate more broadly.
So if language is so important, what advice would you give to conservationists so that their work can attract a broader participation?
Well, it sounds really simple, but I think language and story are critical to our ability to communicate today. Really asking people what their stories are of their connection to the land, whether they're loggers or miners or biologists or fishermen or urban gardeners or people that just spend their days commuting in cars. You'd be surprised the stories they have to tell. And in conveying those stories, we speak to one another about what really matters most to us, and not what our strategies and tactics are. If I've learned anything, it's that speaking about our values, what we really love, what matters most, almost always brings people together. And speaking about our strategies and our tactics almost always divides us. And if you can start at that base of what do you love? Why are you here? It's respectful. It also, you use very different words too when you speak about what you love, as opposed to what your strategies and tactics are.
Right. It's interesting because it goes to you can't critique someone's value. That's their value, but you can critique their strategy or their tactic.
Yeah. And another way of looking at it is their behaviors. The way we act out from our values are often very, very different. And that is a challenge. But if we can connect at our values and stay there longer, there's more of an opportunity that I can hear what you have to say about my behavior. And I'll be a little bit more open to it. The power of story is that it really helps us to cross the boundaries that separate us. Story helps us to be more open, I think, to the claims that each of us have. And if I can really hear your story, really hear where you're from, I'm much more likely to then say, okay, I think I understand where you're coming from. And this may be how I differ with that. So helping a community to have an ongoing dialogue about its landscape is one of the most important things that conservationists can do today. It's really important to protect land, but today it's even more important to protect people's and communities' relationship to that land. And that's the future, is how do we help all Americans have a relationship to the land?
So I wonder, after we learn how to speak to one another and we understand where each other are coming from, how do we move from action, or from conversation to action? Or do you just think it's a natural progression once we have that dialogue?
Yeah, I do think it's just what I've seen, is that when you can have that dialogue and you really mean it, and people take the time to listen, and there's a lot of dialogue that we have that we don't mean, and we're not really listening. So I'm talking about an authentic time to really hear one another. That from that place, people are almost always going to act more holistically, with more inclusivity, with more compassion than they did before. I mean, in every setting that I've worked, from very, very inner city to very, very rural, and to the dislocated suburban, that has proven to be true. People are wise deep inside if we give them the chance to really find that place inside of themselves. And the way to do that, again, is to allow them to access that place through story. And then they're going to see that you're being really authentic, and you're not trying to push your agenda. You're just trying to express what you have faith in. And in our core, I think we understand faith, and we're tuned much more to relationship than we are to isolation. So we too want that. We want to have that relationship with one another and with the land. We don't want to be angry. We don't want to be brittle. We don't want to be disconnected.
So your discussion really says to me that there's native wisdom in every one of us. I think a lot of times people think a native wisdom has to come from the native inhabitants or the elders in the community, but I hear you saying it's more.
Of course, because I'm a first-generation American, and I have to believe that I can be native to this place. Otherwise, I would be I could never connect as a human. So my father came here from Russia. And so my act, I think, of becoming native to where I live in Vermont is hearing the stories, getting to know the place, really being open to what's there, applying myself to it, figuring out what I love. And I think all of us really want that, no matter where we live.
So you're talking cross-generation, not only with your own family, but cross-generations in the community.
Absolutely. Yeah. We all have within ourselves the capacity to become native to a place. That's not something that is only true of Native Americans or Native Europeans. I mean, as humans, we're a living species. We do have that capacity, but it's buried underneath layers and layers of culture and advertising and fear. And the way we escape from all of that is to reconnect with the land. And if it's not carving a spoon, then it's knowing where your food comes from and knowing what your watershed is, and again, just listening to people's stories.
So is there a start in a community? Is it with our youth, or is it with our community leaders?
I think the two great doorways for those of us who love and care the land to bring what we care for out to more of Americans is our children and food. Most Americans right now understand that our children are living in a very, very different world than we lived in. And I think most Americans feel some sorrow. And if not sorrow, then some confusion over that. I mean, we're the last generation to produce kids that ran free and walked to school and played in the woods or just played in backyards. And that nature deficit disorder is felt in our culture. And we feel the same way, I think, about food, that we realize that trucking food 3,200 miles away and that industrial model isn't making us healthy. So I've seen time and time again that food and children are really powerful ways to help a community reconnect and think about what matters most to that community.